Imagine trusting the most respected man on Wall Street, only to discover he was the architect of the biggest financial lie in history. That man was Bernard Madoff, a name that once meant safety, success, and a golden handshake, and later became synonymous with deception on a scale that still haunts investors today. In the next few minutes, we'll walk through how a brilliant trader turned into a master of illusion, how his scheme fooled the smartest minds, and why the fallout still matters for anyone who ever put money into a market. Bernard grew up in a modest Queens neighborhood, the son of a modest tailor who taught him the value of hard work and the power of ambition. From an early age, he was fascinated by the ticker tape that scrolled across the New York Stock Exchange floor, and by the time he was a teenager, he was already dreaming of a seat among the elite. In 1960, he founded a tiny brokerage firm in a cramped office on the Lower East Side, a venture that would later become a towering empire. He started with just a handful of employees, but his relentless drive and uncanny ability to read market currents attracted a steady stream of clients who were eager to ride his wave. What set Bernard apart was not just his trading skill, but his reputation as a market maker. He provided liquidity to countless stocks, smoothing out price fluctuations and earning the trust of exchanges, regulators, and fellow financiers. By the time the 1980s rolled around, he was appointed chairman of the NASDAQ, a position that placed him at the very heart of the nation's electronic trading system. Television interviews showed him smiling confidently, a philanthropist writing checks to hospitals and universities, a regular guest at high-profile political fundraisers. He was the kind of person you could introduce to your parents and feel proud of, the embodiment of the American dream in a suit. That aura of credibility was the perfect camouflage for what was happening behind closed doors. In the early 1990s, Bernard launched a private investment advisory service that promised something almost too good to be true: steady returns of 10 to 12% year after year, with virtually no risk. He told clients that he used a sophisticated split-strike conversion strategy, a blend of options and equities that, on paper, could generate consistent profits regardless of market direction. The brochure was slick, the language was technical, and the numbers looked solid. For a handful of elite hedge funds and wealthy families, the promise was irresistible. The mechanics of the scheme were deceptively simple. New money from feeder funds and high-net-worth individuals was funneled into Bernard's firm, where it was recorded as if it had been invested in the promised strategy. In reality, the firm paid earlier investors with the capital of newer ones, creating the illusion of profit. The returns that appeared on statements were not the result of any real trading, but merely a redistribution of incoming cash. To keep the illusion alive, Bernard's team fabricated trade confirmations, fabricated audit reports, and even staged fake meetings with supposed third-party custodians. The auditors, who were longtime friends, signed off on the books without ever digging into the underlying transactions, and regulators, dazzled by his reputation, never asked the hard questions. What made the fraud so resilient was the network of trust that Bernard cultivated. He cultivated relationships with feeder funds that acted as gatekeepers, promising their own clients exclusive access to his secret strategy. Those feeder funds, in turn, told their investors that they were part of an elite circle, a club that only a few could join. The secrecy became a badge of honor, and the more exclusive the claim, the more investors were willing to overlook red flags. Even seasoned analysts who prided themselves on due diligence were swayed by the glossy performance reports and the endorsement of other respected institutions. And then, in the midst of the global financial crisis, the house of cards began to wobble. The market crash of 2008 caused a wave of redemption requests that the firm could not meet. Investors, desperate for cash, demanded withdrawals that far exceeded the inflow of new money. Bernard's carefully constructed illusions started to crumble, and the truth that had been hidden for decades burst into the light. If this story is blowing your mind, hit that subscribe button and let's keep exploring together. Now, picture the moment in September 2008 when Bernard finally confessed to his sons that the firm's assets were a massive fraud. He told them that the entire operation was a Ponzi scheme, that there were no real investments, and that the billions of dollars that had been reported were nothing more than paper. The confession set off a chain reaction. Regulators swooped in, lawsuits were filed, and the world watched as the man who had once been a symbol of stability was led away in handcuffs. The fallout was immediate and devastating. Investors lost an estimated $500 billion, a figure that dwarfs the losses of the entire financial crisis. Families who had trusted their life savings to the safe returns were left with nothing, and the ripple effects spread through charities, pension funds, and even university endowments that had relied on his promised yields. In each case, the fallout was not just a financial loss, it was a loss of hope, of opportunity, and of the very missions that these institutions had built around. The legal battle that followed was a marathon of courtroom drama, settlements, and appeals that stretched for years. The government moved quickly to seize assets, but the process of untangling the tangled web of accounts proved to be a Herculean task. Lawyers and forensic accountants pored over mountains of paperwork, trying to trace the flow of money through a maze of shell companies and offshore accounts. In the end, the court ordered the confiscation of billions in assets, but even that figure fell short of the total amount that had been promised to investors. The victims were left with a fraction of what they had originally believed they owned, a bitter reminder that justice, while necessary, often arrives too late to fully repair the damage. One of the most striking aspects of the case was the role of the Securities and Exchange Commission, an agency that had once praised Madoff as a pillar of the market. Internal memos later revealed that regulators received warnings about irregularities, but the warnings were dismissed or downplayed, often because of the reverence that Madoff commanded within the industry. The agency's failure to act became a focal point of criticism, prompting a wave of reforms aimed at tightening oversight of private investment advisors. New rules required advisors to register with the Commission, to provide more transparent reporting, and to undergo regular examinations by independent auditors. The concept of fiduciary duty, once a vague promise, was codified into stricter legal obligations, demanding that advisors place their clients' interests above their own. Yet, despite these reforms, the shadow of the scandal continues to loom over the financial world. In the years that followed, other high-profile frauds emerged, each echoing a familiar pattern: charismatic leaders, promises of extraordinary returns, and a culture of deference that discouraged questioning. The lessons of the Madoff case, while widely taught in business schools, often seem to be forgotten in the heat of market optimism. Investors still chase the allure of no-risk strategies, and regulators still grapple with the balance between fostering innovation and protecting the public. The cultural impact of the fraud also seeped into popular media, inspiring movies, documentaries, and even satirical sketches that tried to capture the absurdity of a system that allowed such a deception to flourish. In one well-known film, a character delivers a monologue about the seductive power of certainty, echoing the very language Madoff used to lure his clients. The story became a cautionary tale, not just for financiers, but for anyone who places blind trust in an authority figure without demanding evidence. Beyond the numbers and the legalities, there's a deeper, more human story at the heart of the scandal: the psychology of trust. Madoff's success hinged on his ability to appear trustworthy, to embody the very ideals that investors held dear: stability, expertise, and a track record of success. He cultivated relationships with influential figures, donated to charitable causes, and presented himself as a pillar of the community. In doing so, he created a feedback loop where his reputation reinforced his perceived legitimacy, and that legitimacy in turn attracted more investors. It's a stark reminder that trust, while essential for any functioning market, can also be weaponized when it is not accompanied by rigorous scrutiny. So, what can we, as observers and participants in the financial ecosystem, take away from this saga? First, the importance of due diligence cannot be overstated. Even when a name is familiar and a track record appears spotless, it is vital to ask probing questions, to demand transparent reporting, and to verify claims through independent sources. Second, the role of regulators must be both vigilant and independent, free from the influence of the very entities they are tasked with overseeing. Third, investors should cultivate a healthy skepticism, recognizing that extraordinary returns often come with hidden risks. Finally, the story underscores the need for a culture that encourages whistleblowing and protects those who speak out against misconduct. As we reflect on the magnitude of the fraud, it is also worth remembering the resilience of the victims who, despite their losses, have found ways to rebuild. Some have formed support groups sharing strategies for financial recovery and emotional healing. Others have become advocates for stronger consumer protections, using their experiences to push for legislative change. Their stories serve as a testament to the human capacity to turn tragedy into purpose, to transform personal loss into collective progress. If you found any of these insights eye-opening, consider sharing your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever encountered a situation where trust was misplaced? What steps do you think individuals and institutions can take to safeguard against similar deceptions? I'm eager to hear your perspectives, and I'll be reading every response. Before we wrap up, let's take a moment to acknowledge the broader implications of this episode for the future of finance. Emerging technology